All right, folks, this is it. I have been talking about doing this for a while, and it's time we jump into probably the biggest episode of Galactic Tales I've ever done. This is going to be a little different than standard episodes of the show. We're going to be looking at a trilogy today, and that's something I haven't done yet, really delve into trilogies. We've done two-parters, like the Tron stuff, but this is a big deal. This is probably the biggest deal that I've done so far on the show because this franchise is still going. We're doing this because the fourth movie is coming out, and I just have to get my thoughts out there on this trilogy. So we're talking Thor. We're looking at all of the Thor movies. Thor 1, the first one. Thor 2, The Dark World, the second one. Thor Ragnarok, the third one, the one that we'll get into it. And I want to say a couple of things kind of before we get into this. First off, this is not going to be like a large discussion of Thor's appearances or Loki's appearances in the MCU as a whole. I want to solely focus on the movies that have Thor in the title. That's what I need. I know it's hard to excuse that because you're like, okay, but the Avengers stuff and Loki series are maybe better stories for this character. But I just want to say those are parts of that universe. We're just talking about the movies. Second off, I need to kind of talk about Thor as a character before we really get into this. So the first movie comes out at a time where these waters are still untested. And by untested, I mean we haven't done a big epic in a while in this scale. And the thing is, things like Clash of the Titans, Jason and the Argonauts, they prove this story has merit. But we've never really done this is the Norse mythology movie. We've never touched that too much. There's been stories about them. But Thor is kind of just in terms of Greek mythology, or Norse mythology, I should say, it's just a character and a guy that is known by some, but not by the larger mythos. He's not like a Zeus or a Hercules or any of that. He's just, sometimes the hammer. But it's the Marvel comics and the Marvel character that I think makes the Thor mythos more popular and Norse mythology more popular, which could be a thing people like and a thing people don't like. To me personally, I don't really care about the old school mythologies. My modern mythology is comic books and stuff, so I'm fine by that. But in the comic books, there is clearly a huge disconnect from mythology Thor and what we see in the Marvel stuff. And that's fine. I really think you can have those two separate worlds. The comic stuff is clearly just Stanley, and he's a god and blah, blah, blah. And Jack Kirby's how do I make that look cool? And that's fine. And then other writers have came and explored that mythos, giving it more into the Norse mythology, just giving him more of his own unique brand, kind of turning him into more a cosmic entity as opposed to a god. And that's kind of cool. And I do enjoy seeing that. So when we actually come to doing a Thor movie, there is a lot of stuff you could do from it and a lot of areas you can explore with this character. And I think when we were doing this first movie in 2011, you really are in this weird set of we know this is going somewhere, but we don't know if it's going to pay off. Because believe it or not, kids, and I mean this literally, there was a time with Iron Man 2 and the Incredible Hulk where we could have saw this flop. And if it did, Marvel Studios would not be what it is today. And Thor, I think, was really their big testing ground. Because before this, we had two Iron Man films that were critically received okay. Financially, they did okay. Hulk was already a property we saw on television, an Ang Lee movie years before. Thor was the big step in a direction for something we haven't done before. And you're okay, how do you really capture the essence of Thor? Is there actually something you can do with that character to make it solely original? I'm going to say this, and it's kind of I know it's controversial. I shouldn't say it's kind of controversial. I know it's controversial. I am somebody under the opinion that the Thor trilogy is in a decline and they get more progressively worse and worse, and you feel the effects of those stories just weighing on the topic. And I kind of want to talk about it from two ways, the actual film perspective, just where the culture is at the time. Because in this first movie, we see the hammer at the end of Iron Man 2. We know something is coming, but the culture doesn't know what Thor is at large. It's just he's a Greek goddess kind of character where it's there's a mythology there, I'm sorry I keep calling it a Greek god. It's like a Norse god. I was talking about Zeus earlier. It just got in my brain. He's a god, and you kind of get that story, but you don't know him well. Then you get like two literally unknown actors to play Thor and Loki. Chris Hemsworth is not a known name. Tom Hiddleston is not a known name. And you're like, can these two build off this idea of like a Shakespearean otherworldly story? And they really can. And I know this is gonna make, I think, a lot of people just like, you're a dumbass, you don't know anything. The first Thor movie, I think, is the most purely Thor story that I've seen in a long time. And I love the way it plays off itself, because this is a larger than life godly story about these people who can potentially learn a lesson. And this is something I think kind of gets lost later on in this trilogy, is Thor being humbled. Because later on in the trilogy, it's just people supporting the belief of what this guy is. But this is a movie that's like, he's young, relatively. He looks young. He's headstrong. He learns lessons. He goes to battle. He wins the day. People celebrate him. He really has no reason to falter. Right? He can come in, win the day, do whatever he wants. And you see that at the beginning of the movie, where he's just this happy-go-lucky guy who hasn't really had a genuinely deep thought ever. And you see him like contrasting that against his brother, who is this guy who knows there should be more going on. He's kind of looking at the world in a way that his brother can't, and kind of slowly realizing something about himself that leads him on a path. It's very fascinating, and I really do dig that. And the way their father is kind of trying not to play them against each other, but omitting truths that lead them both down their separate journeys. It's a really complex story, and I can 100% understand why you get Kenneth Branagh to do this, because this is his wheelhouse. The big operatic Shakespearean stories, these beautiful Dutch angles and these stupid designs all over the place. This is the best looking Asgard we have seen, because this is going to be something I know people are going to get mad about, but the film camera is so much better than the digital ones. Like, the colors just pop so vibrantly. The actual, like, mythos for Asgard looks so vibrant and sparkling and cool and clean and crisp. Like, the Rainbow Bridge looks amazing. The colors just pop. The shine is so beautiful in this original movie. And the costumes, they look so much more ethereal and grandiose, and I just love it so much. And this movie, too, it's also not shying away from some of the stuff of the old school Thor books. The Warriors 3 are here, and huge contention for me later on in this series is that nobody does anything with the Warriors 3. Those characters, they don't have a rich history, but they are important to an Asgardian story, and I wish they did more of it. Lady Sif, another very important character that I'm glad they are finding their footing for, so that's very cool. And then Odin and Freya and all these characters, like, they are so larger than life in this movie, and you really feel that, and you just understand, like, this is a kid who is learning his lesson. This is his dad saying, you're going to time out, go learn your lesson on a place that you will never understand. And again, because this is like the first movie for Thor, I get the necessity for him to come to Earth and learn his lesson and just like do human things for a bit, but just that fish out of water feeling is so lost sometimes today, where everything kind of has to be like quippy and jokey and hoop-de-doop. But I'm like, he is funny when he's like smashing cups and walking into stores like, I need a horse. Like, that is funny, but that's like built into the character, where it's not like we have to take a minute to be like, Aluma whatty? You know, like those stupid jokes. It's just like, okay, this feels like an actual guy who knows his world and is learning about another one, and that's where the comedy comes from. It's brilliant like that. And I could sit here all day and talk about the Kenneth Branagh of it all, because there is such that feeling to it. You can really tell what he wanted to play as was like the connection of the brothers, the way that Loki feels betrayed by the world, and kind of that's why he acts against everything. But at the end of the day, he cares for his brother, he cares for his family, and he wants to keep them safe. I really like that. And this, like, that sacrifice he makes for himself, the first time we think Loki is dead, where he lets go of Thor and just like lets Thor have that cathartic moment, like, you can't do this without learning a lesson. You have to kind of grow up from this thing that you've always been. It's essentially watching a teenager learn, like, once you're an adult, shit hits the fan, you have to deal with stuff. I really like that lesson. I really enjoy the way it's being told. And I know it's kind of controversial, but I really like the supporting cast on Earth. Natalie Portman as Jane Foster, I get it. I think at this period in her life, she was just more like, I I know where my career is going, so maybe if I play ball here, I can make me do things I want later. I really like to see that. Eric Selvig, I get it. I don't think there's anything completely wrong with that character. He does become worse as the story goes. And Darcy's silly, but it's fine. She eventually is just Kat Dennings it up, and I don't hate that at all. But you really do buy the relationship between Thor and Jane, and I really like the chemistry where she's like, I feel like I shouldn't like you because you are pretty much everything I'm against. I am a woman of science, and you are literally mythology. And he's like, well, science is just whatever, just magic you don't understand yet. Is what, magic is just science, whatever, you get it. And it's like, that's kind of a fun idea. And you buy why these two would care about each other. And again, I really don't like when these stories step away from the romantic ideas. You should talk about the romance in these stories. And having that be a part of this story really makes me happy. And I really enjoy that. I just like, it's just such a small atmospheric story where it's not like the end of the world. It's just like, this guy is being taught a lesson. His brother is mad at him. He's going to send a thing down to kill him. The Destroyer armor looks fantastic, so beautiful, so crisp, so clean. Just the way it moves and looks and shines, and the lights and the fire. Oh my goodness. It looks so good. And I'm like, this is where you just feel it with that digital camera. It doesn't work with digital, You just you look at this film lens and you're like, oh my God. Look at the colors of this. Look at the shine of this. It just looks so crispy and perfect, and it just feels so nice. I really like this movie. I think it's just so quiet compared to other things, even quiet compared to Iron Man. It's just a story of a family dilemma that affects a larger universe. It's not like the end of the world is coming. It's more like this guy is now in a world that he doesn't know, dealing with stuff he can't understand, and here we are. There is references to S.H.I.E.L.D. Of course, there is. These early movies really had to show you there was something else going on here. Clint Barton shows up. Who gives a shit? Jeremy Renner is a bad choice for that character. Just a really silly moment, but it's fine because surrounding that, we get a very powerful moment where Thor thinks he's going to be able to lift his hammer, and he can't. And that's when he's like, oh shit, something is not right about me. Something is not right about what I'm doing. Why is none of this working for me? Why am I suddenly being humbled by the world at large? Why is this suddenly something I have to deal with? I really like that. And look, Chris Hemsworth being relatively unknown really made this character something special because he played into the Shakespearean of it all. And that's the important thing that these earlier movies did. They got that these characters are Shakespearean. They are intense. They are gripping. They are compelling. They are trying to do something else. Tom Hiddleston is just brilliant. And I could do it again. I've talked about Loki a lot, but that is just the most perfect casting I think these earlier movies did, where it's here's a guy that just knows to grow with it. He's I can feel the character. I can feel the beats, the sadness in his eyes, the anger that is resonating through it to where he's going to become. I really like how this early Loki starts off as just sad. He's broken. He's afraid. He wants to feel love and acceptance, but ultimately feels like the outsider. And that's such a cool, compelling thing. And I just love the dynamic that at the beginning of the story, he is just the quirky one of the friend group, because they hang out with the Warriors and Sith, and he's just a little bit different than the rest of them. And I really like that feeling. And I could talk endlessly about the wrongfulness that they did to the Warriors 3 because it really upsets me. You have these really interesting guys. Come on, just do something with them. You really just killed them off for no reason, and that upset me. I like the use of Heimdall. That little bridge thing, it looked really good. I just love the big observatory-looking lens that shoots people everywhere. It's just so crispy, and I love it. And you just really feel like this was a director's vision with a brilliant cast that was we can experiment and try something new, be creative, be original, be thoughtful, be thought-provoking. Just accept that we are trying something and experiencing all these bright ideas in this really dramatic Shakespearean tragedy of brothers warring for their father's affection and how that affects a small village where they go to see this and how their friends are drawn into this battle of ultimate brotherhood. And it's this is so cool. I really like it. It's so small. It's so quiet. There's nothing quite like this movie. And you can tell it's an early on thing for actors because look at Chris Hemsworth. His eyebrows and his beard are not their natural color. And this is going to be where it's suddenly when this movie becomes popular enough, he's going to change a lot of things about the character. And I get that. But there's just something so special about this original film that nothing truly feels like it. I think it's near perfect. It does everything right that the comics needed it to do. It feels otherworldly while still being down to earth and having a human connection. Those are things important to the Thor mythos and the Thor character. And it explores its ideas very positively. And that is saying a lot because from down here, like from here, everything is downhill. And then we go to Thor the Dark World, which happens immediately after Avengers. We have Iron Man 3 and then Thor the Dark World. And you can really feel a couple of things kind of like take form with Thor the Dark World. First off, the Infinity Saga is upon us. We now know where we're headed, so we have to build stories that go there. We have to tell the stories that aim for that thing. And that is the detriment to Thor the Dark World because now it can't be wholly original or wholly itself. It has to just connect to the larger story, which that is also something I could talk endlessly about, like the larger story of these movies. You don't need a larger story. And I know people are like, it's all about the universe. That's why we like it. It doesn't need to be connected. And I think Thor the Dark World of this time period is like the most egregious of that because the whole villainous plot is just an Infinity Stone. Like the ether is just an Infinity Stone in its raw form, and it like controls Natalie Portman, and then it's like, oh, that's weird. And I guess there is like something to be said about the lack of speciality coming into this one. Brana doesn't return. I get it. Like that's a big commitment to do another one of these. Alan Taylor shows up to do this one. Pretty much just like a hatchet job where it's like, okay, I can come in and do the work without getting any of the praise because it's the most forgettable Marvel movie where there's not really anything special happening or anything truly creative being told to you. It's just we're after the Avengers. We want to tell another Thor story because we have to set up to this is where this is going. And it is just kind of unforgettable. You have Loki returning post Avengers, and it just doesn't feel like anything. It's just like, here he is back. Now, we're doing a little more quippy, we're getting a little more jokey with certain things, and again, that is just where you feel it. And you can just look at the first one and this one. The shift in the cameras we are using is very noticeable. I still think this one looks better than later movies that come out from like the MCU, but there's something to be said. Like, we're no longer really telling a story about these quiet brothers feuding over their father's affection and learning the truths about themselves while being humbled at the same time. Now we're like, okay, Thor's a character. We have a mythos to play with. Here's the dark elves that he can fight. They're not really going to connect to anything else. And then we can have like an Infinity Stone show up and do all that and just kind of make it like this cosmic trip story about like, you know, going world to fight creatures and shit. It's just not a lot of anything. And I think you really feel the Thor magic is dying down for everybody involved. Like, you feel Hemsworth just like tired of it. You feel Hiddleston like, I can do more of this. You really just, there's nothing going for it. You're not doing any of the specialty that you saw in the first one. The Warriors 3 are prevalent, but not as prominent. Sif doesn't have as much of a personality. Nobody is truly feeling wholly original, and that is a huge problem with the Dark World, where it is just so blatantly filler. And I'm not here to say that the MCU doesn't do filler anymore. They do a lot of filler still, but this is the first time where you felt it being that egregious. You know, Iron Man 3 is a movie about PTSD, and a guy striving with his grief, like, how did he overcome it? So the second Thor movie follows that. It's just the story of this guy, and he's like, okay, I gotta solve this now. Natalie Portman's only here because she was in the first one and she's contracted for another one. That's it. Nothing special about it. Nothing wholly original about it. It looks like a very mediocre movie in terms of everything going for it. And that's fine. I don't think it needs to be special. I don't think it needs to be wholly original or creative or just anything. Unless you tell a compelling story, and you didn't. So The Dark World, it's not a good movie. It's really not. But this is going to be probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say. I think for anything I talk about in the MCU, I really don't like talking about Ragnarok, and I don't enjoy I just don't like the movie. It really upsets me. That's all I have to say on the Dark World. Let's get into Ragnarok right now, Narok. So we come off of another Avengers movie. We come off of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Nobody in the Thor movies wants to do Thor anymore. Everyone's been burned out. So what do? You cast a guy like Taika Waititi to come in and like punch up your script, make a good directorial movie, and just fuck about for a bit. Like he's in to fix the franchise, and I really think they picked him because of James Gunn. Because they saw Guardians was like quirky and weird and bubbly. And they're like, oh, we should do that for Thor because it's kind of in space. Doop-de-doop. And look, I could probably do a whole video talking about how Guardians changed the course of history for superhero movies. Because then everything had to be like Guardians. Thor Ragnarok's the most egregious. I think this is one of the least funny, least engaging, and most boring movies in the Marvel Universe. This is not something I enjoy. And again, from an acting standpoint, I could kind of see how Chris Hemsworth would be like, no, I want this to be the direction the character goes. I'm sick of playing like the straight-laced guy who doesn't get the joke. I just want to be a bro. I don't want to have to act. I just want to show up on set with like my normal hair and beard and just be like silly and goofy instead of actually trying. Because damn it, he's not trying in this one. In the first one, you feel like a guy learning a lesson. In the second one, he's doing the work, putting in the time. In this movie, he's just like, I'm a bro, I'm a goofball, look at me silly, I'm gonna fall all the time and knock stuff over. And it's so frustrating. Because the thing is, like, this is a character we have literally seen be the most badass guy in the world, right? He doesn't need to learn his lesson, so we're changing him to be a goofball. It really doesn't work. When he's like knocking over stuff in the Sanctum Sanctorum, when he's throwing stuff at the what the fuck's he throwing it at? Like the wall when he's on Sakaar and it bounces back and hits him in the head. It's so dumb. It's so cheesy and lazy. It just feels like we're just going to make this a comedy as opposed to making it like a Shakespearean tragedy. And maybe it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but name one Thor comic book that's really like a lighthearted comedy. They're all about like this guy going through this turmoil and figuring out his destiny and fighting against it. Like every Thor comic book is just intense and scary and thought-provoking and this like ethereal story. Like, why couldn't we do that again? And I literally think there's a shift in the culture that says you can't tell that story anymore. You tell that story and you're making like Dune. And people like Dune, but Dune is not going to be for everybody. And that sucks because then it's just like we can't actually have any real dramatic moments in this movie. They're all undercut by the jokes and undercut by the story we're telling. There's a lot going on in this movie, and to its credit, it does balance it all pretty perfectly. This movie sees a couple of things. We deal with the ramifications of the end of the Dark World where Loki is Odin. Odin actually dies. We see where Hulk has been for the last couple bit. We are introduced to Valkyrie. We go to Sakaar. We actually see Doctor Strange for a minute. Thor loses his eye. Hela returns. And like, that's a lot of stuff going on in the movie. And you look at like what's going on in this one compared to Thor from 2011. It's like a guy is kind of an asshole. His dad teaches him a lesson while his brother figures out that he was lied to his whole life. And now it's like, I have to team up with this brother on an alien planet while we're in a gladiatorial combat ring. We find a woman who used to be a Valkyrie, but she was taken down by Hela and her evil forces. And now those forces have returned to enact Ragnarok on the planet. And I'm actually supposed to be on a mission to find the Infinity Stones, but that's not what I'm doing right now. Now I'm doing my own story. And there's just like, that's a lot to deal with. And I don't really like it. There are things I really like about this movie. The Executioner by Karl Urban, that is some great acting. He's such a character actor that deserves more credit, and he's fantastic in this. Cate Blanchett as Hela is sexy as fuck. I think she's the highlight of this franchise in terms of villains. I like Loki, but he's not a villain. They really couldn't keep him to being a villain after Avengers. He had to be the anti-hero. I get it. I really like Cate Blanchett. She's just like a force of nature wrecking everything. But she kills the Warriors 3 in an unsanctimonious way. It's just like they're dead. Like, are you kidding me? You're literally just destroying the mythos of this thing you created. And I really think that hurts the actual narrative of this. It's just like, it's done. You get it. You've experienced it. You've seen the Thor movies. You didn't like it then. You're not going to like it now. So let's try rebooting it and changing the character forever. The Thor Hulk fight is fine. I don't care about that in the slightest. The fight with Hela is more interesting. There are moments in this film that are just smart and creative and cool, but it's just so annoying to me, and just like the quirky, ooh, Jeff Goldblum's the Grandmaster, look how silly we can be, and just making stupid jokes about every expense, and it frustrates me because this is kind of where the rest of the movies are going to go in tone. This is kind of like, we saw that people love this, they're going to eat this up, and this is just where it stays from now on. But it's just so easy. It takes the easy way out. It just takes opportunities to cheap itself out, and I don't really like that. And again, I get why people like it, because it's flashy, it's bright, it has great colors, but if you put those colors with the camera we were using for the Thirst 4 movie, holy shit, would it sparkle. It would just look so much clearer than just like this little dull, grainy, like digital lens bullshit where everything just appears into nothing and doesn't have that spark to it. It just looks so dull at times. And you have all these bright colors, and I'm like, how can you have this many beautiful colors and have it look so boring? It's also, it does this thing that I talk about this all the time, and I do get some hate for it, but it's true, where it's just like, if we blur out the background, it makes the depth of the field look like it's in focus for the heroes, so we can get away with like really cheap looking backgrounds. You have some beautiful sets in this film, but some terrible backgrounds. Utterly disdaining, just the worst thing you've ever seen. When it should pop, it doesn't. Amazing how weird this is. And Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie, I think, is a fun character that just, you get used to it and you settle into it. And you really understand why, like, the Natalie Portman stuff, Jane isn't back, Selvig isn't back. Why do we need them now? We clearly don't want to tell stories on Earth with this character anymore, so we don't need to put them in here. We're just going to slowly move it away over to like this larger story where we're telling different stuff. And that's fine. I don't really hate that. I just think you're losing something that makes Thor special by doing this. Suddenly he is just like Star-Lord, bro-ish, quippy, loser, Scott Lang-ish, and I know from Chris Hemsworth's aspect, he is suddenly one of the biggest stars in the world. He is leading franchises. He's leading blockbusters. So from his perspective, I completely understand where he's like, I don't want to have to put on the big wig and dye my eyebrows and beard and just show up and talk like this all the time. I just want to show up and be like, hey, what's up, dude? Like, blah, blah, blah. We're doing this now. I get that. But I think it ruined the character. I think it turned Thor from this tragic figure who learned his lesson, and now he's just become, we're going to push him in all these different directions, and suddenly he's just going to learn a lesson and then not. And it's just frustrating and annoying. And I really think there is a de-escalation of these films where you are starting off so strong and original with this character, where it's like, this is the mythos we are experiencing. Here's this beautiful Asgard and Bifrost and all these colorful stories. And look at the effects for like the frost giants and all of this. It's like beautiful. Then it's Thor the Dark World, and it's like, oh, now we're just filling time to the next one. And then it's Thor Ragnarok, and it's like, forget everything you thought you knew about this character. We're going to make him as simple as can be for you, while giving you all the things you think you want to see, like bright colors, Jeff Goldblum. We'll have some story in Asgard, but fuck Asgard. We're going to blow it up and kill it. You don't have to worry about Asgard anymore. Here's the Hulk. You like the Hulk? You love the Hulk? You want to see the Hulk in these movies? Like, yeah. It's just, I don't really enjoy that. And I really don't like the forced, like, Hulk and Thor relationship. I think there's just so much about it that just doesn't work and feels too obvious and egregious. And I don't really like this film. And that's why I'm so hesitant about Love and Thunder. And I'm not going to talk about Love and Thunder too much. We'll talk about that when it comes out. But this film, Ragnarok, is just one I think people give too much credit for. It didn't break the mold. I think it just showed you, like, we can do practical sets with bright colors and silly jokes, and people are going to jerk ourselves off. Like, that's what they want, apparently. That's what you guys want, right? You just want to see that, and I don't care if you like that or not. I just think from a standpoint of what this character should represent to the universe he's a part of, you are making him too much like the rest of it, and you're not really making him original or interesting or fascinating sight to watch. His father dies, and he's like, you're not the god of hammers, you're the god of thunder. You don't need the hammer. Well, then he gets the hammer later. It's it's an interesting choice. And there's stuff in there that's cool, stuff in there that's not. But overall, I don't think any of them have compared to the first movie. As simple that story is, it's still the most Thor story where it actually feels like this could be a fable you tell about Thor, to like your kids, like when you're in like your Norwegian village, you're like, this is the tale of Thor when he comes to our planet and meets these people and his brother tries to kill him, and suddenly there's this big war raging between Asgard and all these people fighting each other. Whereas if you were to explain Ragnarok, it's like just too much, and I don't like it. And I know that's controversial, but it's true. Too much of these are becoming the same thing. And that is a topic for a later day. We were not going to get into that. Let's just finish on some final thoughts on this. Tom Hiddleston is a fantastic Loki. He made that character something wholly original and creative. Cate Blanchett as Hela is the best villain in any of these trilogies. She's fantastic. She is creative and beautiful and gorgeous and awesome. Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 are integral parts of the Thor mythos. I wish they were utilized better in all of these films. The relationship we are forcing you to see from Jane Foster and Thor doesn't work at times, and the incentive to push it forward really feels like we have to fill time to the next one as opposed to making a creative story. Chris Hemsworth got too big to actually give a shit about making this a like Shakespearean tragedy. Instead, he wants it to be just fun and okay. The fact that this is one of the only trilogies with non-consistent directors for each outing really shows you that there's no clear direction with this character. So if we want to morph him into whatever he wants to be, we can without actually having it be a real character. Because Thor's the worst trilogy out of anything in the MCU. Thor is one of the worst written characters out of anybody in the MCU, which is amazing to say because he has probably the most expansive mythos to explore, not just in the comic books, but in mythology. And why does he have the weirdest trilogy that's the worst? I don't get it. But I will say this. Oh, the film cameras look so much better than the digital ones, don't they? They just look so beautiful and sharp and perfect. I feel bad for this trilogy. Like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, this gets a lot of shit for different reasons. I think the main one I don't like about this is, like, you just made this character so simple as it went on, didn't you? You really just took the idea of, like, the arrogant man, that, like, the Tony Stark, Stephen Strange thing, simpled it down. And that doesn't really work. And you can... I might put up, like, a panel to show you. Like, you can see the deconstruction is, like, the digression of the way the CG looks in these movies where it's, like, sharp to just what's standard, what we have on file. My goodness. These Thor movies, I don't particularly like any of them. I just think the first one has the most interesting and creative narrative being driven to it. It doesn't feel like it needs to rest its laurels on anything else that has came before it. It's just a nice story, easy breezy, beautiful cover Thor. I love it. I like it. I don't love it. I like it. Thor's a weird character. And I probably will never talk about these films again because honestly, I have very little to say about them. If you couldn't tell from this video, I don't know what else you could say. Like, this character is steeped in mythology. They somehow found a way to make it boring, and I don't get that. It looks good at times, but also it's like, where are you going with this? There's nothing special about it. I don't know. There's decades of comics for you. Maybe instead of just like ripping off panels, you actually get the feel and the taste of what those books are about. But whatever, I don't care. Thor's not a character I like. And if we ever come back to talk more of the MCU trilogies, I don't have a lot of good things to say about any of them either. I don't know. I'm very mixed on the MCU. So Thor's just the saddest case of a cool character losing his footing. That sucks, but if you like it, I don't care. You like whatever you want. I'll hate whatever I want. So, the Thor trilogy. The Dark World, boo. Ragnarok, The first one, yeah. That is going to do it for this trilogy corner. That's not what I'm calling it, but that's what we're going to stick with, of Galactic Tales. Now, thank you guys for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.